It's 2020, the year of perfect vision, so I guess I won't be needing these anymore. Let's play some games. I guess some things never change.
Are you being stupid again?
Oh, obviously, yeah, of course I am.
Well, stop it. We've got work to do. I've got it on good authority that channels which regularly introduce new consoles to their reviews have a chance at hitting a larger market. So I need you to start reviewing something that you haven't reviewed before.
Like what? We've reviewed every console and handheld that I've ever had. We've even reviewed a Tiger Electronics LCD game. You can't scrape the bottom of the barrel any more than I've scraped it.
This is a problem. Okay, I've got it. We'll review a system and all of its games all at once.
You're insane.
No, I'm not. I've never even been to Paris.
Insane, not insane.
What's the difference?
Oh, forget it.
Done. Now go and review this N-Joypad.
Do I have to?
Yes, and stop grimacing. You might find you enjoy it.
Oh my goodness, please never make puns again.
I cannot agree to that. Now get to it, time is wasting.
I can't believe I'm taking orders from a monster.
I heard that.
You weren't meant to. This is the N-Joypad. It's a cheap Famiclone clone that I found at a charity shop a while back, but you could probably still get it on the internet because, let's face it, on the internet this stuff never goes out of date. Now, you've already seen what this thing can do from my review of Binary Land on the MSX and the Nintendo and this thing last year. And I have to admit, I was actually quite surprised at how well this thing works. It's one of those systems that really shouldn't work as well as it does, but manages to surprisingly hold its own quite well. It's also one of those rare Famiclone systems that doesn't work on cartridges or some kind of built-in ROM system where you turn it on and it's immediately there with everything. Instead, it uses discs. You put them in here because it's basically a PlayStation 1 clone. But the discs, they don't hold any data. When you open the disc tray, you can see that there's no laser inside to read the discs. Instead, there are these 3 buttons that can be pressed down. The number of buttons that get pressed tells the N-Joypad which disc is inserted into the machine, and thus which of its 3 inbuilt ROM chips it should run. There is apparently a 4th button, or at least a system like a 4th button, where if you open it up and press a button inside the system, it will completely bypass the disc gimmick, which means that you can play any of the 59 built-in games at any time. You can go straight to your favourites, which is useful if you ever lose the disc. And yes, I do mean it when I say favourites, because some of the titles, as we'll see in this review on this system, are actually surprisingly good fun to play. But let's not get too bogged down straight away. Let's have a look and see how this little machine actually came into existence. The N-Joypad is a product of Advanced Bright Limited, or ABL for short. This is a Hong Kong company which is known for its wide variety of rip-off consoles, such as the Console TV, the Console TV Challenge, and the Arcade TV game set. The N-Joypad is their inevitable weird console that doesn't quite fit the usual mold, as it uses the discs that I mentioned earlier instead of plug-in cartridges. What's interesting about ABL's clone system though is that, unlike many Famiclone systems which will just rip off Nintendo or Namco or people like that, this actually has a few games on it that are from third-party developers in China. It's like Opposite Day or something. We've got a pirate system that is from a part of China that's ripping off developments in China. They're eating themselves these days. But does that mean that they're bad? Well, funnily enough, some of those games that are on here from the Chinese developers are actually pretty good fun as well. They hold up against some of Nintendo and Namco and everyone else's main system games. But the thing we have to ask ourselves is, does any of that excuse this system being a pirate system? Well, of course it doesn't. But at least it gives us something interesting today to take a look at. The controller, like the console itself, is made from reasonably sturdy plastic, and it'll stand up to repeated use, which is nice, but it also feels incredibly light, as if there's only the bare minimum amount of stuff inside it. I wouldn't want to drop the controller or the console, because I'm pretty sure they'd smash the tiny sharp pieces if you did, but if you're careful with it, it'll probably last quite well. The controller is also very, very small. It's like a PlayStation DualShock controller if you look at it, or maybe a third-party version of that. But it's tiny, as if it got shrunk in the wash or something. I mean, I've got a DualShock 2 here, and look at the comparison. They look almost about the same size, but if I put it in front, you kind of see that it is a little bit smaller, like it's shrunk in the wash. Also, the DualShock has really, really nice responsive controls. This has clicky, not quite as responsive as you'd want buttons. They will work, and it'll work decently enough that you can play the games, but it's not the top-notch quality. However, having said all of that, I have seen worse controllers, so it gets a pass. It's not the best, but certainly not the worst. I have pretty small hands, and this is only barely comfortable enough to use. If you're big enough that the Duke or the Dreamcast controller is pretty good in your hands, well, you're going to struggle with the N-Joypad. Also, this has the standard thing on Famiclones that are trying to hide what they are. We have 4 buttons here, but the Famicom only has 2, so we have A and B. We also have X and Y. Now, I don't care that they're called X and Y. They're A and B, so at least you get to double up. So if one of them breaks, and unfortunately with some of these clone consoles, you know that's probably going to happen at some point, at least you've got to double up, you know? So anyway, I think we've talked about it enough. Shall we try the games?
Please do. That's why you're here, after all.
Let's do it. The first disc is the Intelligence Games series. Now, if you're thinking that means it's going to be full of puzzle games with the occasional educational title, well, you'd be half right in that case. Some of these are puzzles, and some of them are action-adventure games. Basically, you're taught right from the start that the disc titles only barely have an indication of what might be on there, so it's best to ignore them. Now, let's begin with Game 1. So the first game is called Fun Click, which is a direct rip-off of Union Bond's NES game Poke Click. At this point, I'm sure you already have 2 questions. 1. Does this game have anything to do with Pokemon? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but no, it does not. And 2, why does the title screen make it look like this game is called Fun Flick with 2 L's? And the answer to that one is because the guy who did the title screen didn't really do it very well. Way to English, guys. That should be CL, not double L. This is not Welsh, it's not a th sound, it's a cl sound. Anyway, the game looks a lot like your standard Match 3 game, such as Bejeweled, or its Amstrad CPC clone Betiled, which we did review on this show in the past, and it's definitely a one that's worth checking out. Once you get past the surface though, Fun Click is a different sort of game, one that I'd expect is aimed more at children. This isn't a Match 3 game, it's a Match Any Multiple Greater Than 1 game, which makes it a hell of a lot easier than Bejeweled, and also ruins the point of playing it. Because you only have to match 2 or more items together instead of 3 or more, there's absolutely no gameplay to this entire thing. There's no strategy, there's no need to forward plan, and there's no need to play. It's a dull game that won't even entertain very young children for long. As the opening act for the system, it's a terrible one. So, let's move on pretty quick. Now here's a fun one. If you've ever played one of those tile sliding games, such as Chip's Challenge, you will know immediately what to do in Box World, which is a clone of Box World by Niche Code, because apparently sometimes pirates aren't even going to bother hiding the name of the game that they've ripped off. You have to arrange the boxes on the red dots in as few moves as possible. There's only one proper solution to every single screen, and it's so easy to prevent yourself from winning thanks to one improperly moved box, so the game is far harder than it seems. Unfortunately, the controls on the N-Joypad's cheap-ass controller aren't always great, so it is all too easy to accidentally make more than one move in any direction, and this leads to quite a few unsolvable stages, which for me isn't all that great. Still, the game is a lot of fun and it's so replayable that I was willing to come back to it time and time again. I highly recommend this one if you're into puzzle games. Next up, we have matching, but don't worry, this isn't one of those old PSAs about not playing with matches. It's a pirate copy of Memory Puzzle by Nice Code again. And if you're thinking that this is going to be one of those games about turning cards over and then trying to score a match, then you would be right. If you have a young child in the house and you want them to improve their short-term memory, give them a game like this to try. It might actually help, and it's decent enough to keep them occupied, provided they're old enough to hold a controller, and also young enough to not get immediately bored by this simple concept. Just turn the sound down, okay? Since the sound on this game is atrocious. I'm not joking either. Running your fingers down a blackboard would be a better noise. This is the most basic of games. It's a memory test involving 16 randomly sorted cards, and it gives you 8 pairs to match up because of the 16 cards. So you click on a card and it briefly turns over so you can see what it is. Then you have to find its duplicate. It's a game that I'm sure we've all played before, and it's a game that won't hold most of our attentions. If you can get them all within 30 seconds, and you will, because there's only so many places that it can be, then you will win. If you win, you have 2 choices: play again, or reset the console to choose a different game. I suggest you do the latter. So what's next on this disc of pirated pleasures? Strange Pop Pop? This can't be right, but it is. This is Strange Pop Pop, and I really wish I was making that name up. But no, that's genuinely what they called this. Originally it was retailed by Nice Code on the Famiclone as Magic Bubble. But let's face it, this is Tetris. Tetris with bubbles and a waterfall theme. There's little that can be said about Tetris that hasn't already been said. It's practically the best game you can play on a handheld, and it works pretty well on consoles as well. It's one of my favourite games, in fact, and I could play a good version of Tetris all day and not get bored. Sadly, this version is not a good version of Tetris. Not only is the music awful, but the controller makes moving the blocks difficult, and it's all too easy to accidentally misplace a shape or have the drop function stick when you've dropped a piece. So the next one comes just flying straight down the screen without warning. When that happens, you're left with a frustrating mess of pieces that look awful because all of these graphics suck. If you want to play Tetris, choose one of the million other versions. If this is your only version, well, I suppose you can get used to it, but I personally wouldn't want to have to. So next up we have Warrior Chase, which gets us halfway through the first disc. This one is a bit weird. The original game is Ninja-kun Maiju no Boken, and it seems to be a game about jumping up platforms, killing monsters on the way. Most of the monsters will shoot at you the second that they see you, so you're best off killing them from behind if you can manage it. This is especially important with the white helmet creatures because they will fire projectiles faster than you can, which means that you really need to get them when they can't fire back, otherwise you're toast. It's actually not a bad game, and the cheap controller on the N-Joypad doesn't get in the way of the gameplay, so I recommend you give this one a try. It's not brilliant, but it's far from terrible. But now we come to the first absolute gem on Disc 1, and actually one of the best titles in the entire N-Joypad range. This is Burger Build, and as you can probably tell just by looking at it, the game is an unashamed pirate copy of Namco's classic arcade game, Burger Time. It plays fantastically, it looks great, and the controls work really well despite the flaws of the N-Joypad's cheap and quite clunky controller. I have to admit that I am terrible at the game and I can't even get off level 1, but I do keep coming back to play it anyway because I adore playing Burger Time. Even here on this clone console, it's a real treat. So we've just had a classic arcade manufacturer mercilessly pirated. It must be time that our cloning chums gave Nintendo a try, I suppose. So the next game is Right Move, but Famicom owners will know it better as Gomoku Narabe Renju. And this vaguely translates as 5 pearls in a row. Japanese players will immediately recognise this game as it's very popular over there, and it's usually referred to simply as Renju, which basically translates as pearls, referring to the playing pieces. This is a game involving laying down 5 coloured dots in a row without your opponent getting a dot on either end of your row. That's harder than it sounds as well. Each player places 1 pearl on the game board per turn, and you can try and arrange the pearls to get 5 in a row in any direction, including vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. If both players are paying attention, you'll usually end the game with a draw. If you're playing as well as I am, the computer will always win. Sometimes the simplest games give you the most fun. When I first loaded this up, I was expecting it to be a rendition of Othello, but it really isn't, although it does look similar. Don't worry though if you've never played this classic game, because you'll pick up the rules even if you're unfamiliar. You'll pick them up pretty quick. And once you have worked out what you're doing, it's actually a fair amount of fun. It's a decent video game version of a traditional board game, and if you're into that sort of thing here, which I am, because I am a sucker for old-style traditional board games, then you'll have a lot of fun. I quite enjoyed it. Even, to be honest, I am terrible at winning in the game itself. It's just one of those things. Now we get straight into another great title, originally released as Magic Jewelry by Huang Xinwei. It's here on the N-Joypad as Abacus. Basically, it's a variant on the Match Multiples Falling Blocks game that would eventually coalesce into Sega's Columns. I love Columns, so as you can imagine, I love this game as well. There's only one problem with Abacus though, and that's the fact that the symbols are taken directly from playing cards. Now that might not seem too bad at first, but the thing is, the resolution on these old 8-bit games isn't that great, and they included both the clubs and the spades, which end up looking far too similar to one another for their own good. In a game that requires split-second timing to match shapes, the spades and clubs become difficult to distinguish at the same speed as the rest of the blocks, and that means missed opportunities. If one of those had been in grey instead of black, this would have made the game far easier on the eye and far more fun to play. As it stands, it's still a pretty fun game, and I've lost many an hour to playing it, so I'll still recommend you give it a try, even with those flaws. Now we come to the final game on the first disc. This is a game that was released in Japan and in Europe, but not in the US, because Nintendo of America back then had a rule against religious imagery in its games. It's also one of the absolute best games on the N-Joypad, and a firm favourite for me on the NES as well, which, to be fair, would not be unsurprising because it's the same game. But which game is it? Well, it's Devil World. Or to give it its N-Joypad title, Underworld. Too dramatic? Nintendo's Devil World is a game that I'll freely admit I didn't know about until I picked it up on the N-Joypad, but now that I've played this pirate version, I've also played the original NES title, and I'll definitely track down a copy of my own when I eventually add an NES to my gaming museum. Featured here as Underworld, you play as a small green dragon thing, and your goal varies between levels, but what doesn't vary is how quickly you can find yourself trapped by the moving borders. On some levels, you need to collect Bibles and stuff them into holes in a block, while on other levels you need to grab a crucifix and then go and pick up some dots like your Pac-Man. You'll also control very much like Pac-Man, because once you start moving in a direction, you won't stop unless you hit something or press the D-pad to change direction, which is why I'm pressing all these buttons. As I mentioned earlier, the border keeps moving, which quickly reveals that the levels are actually very small, but they tessellate and wrap around, which makes for some very interesting mazes. You've got to be careful if you go near the edge of the screen though, because if the level scroll changes direction, and it will, you can get yourself squashed when a side of the maze starts to scroll off the screen. There are enemies in the maze as well, as if there wasn't enough to be getting on with already. Sometimes you can shoot a fireball at them, sometimes you can't. On the crucifix levels, you can only fireball enemies when you're holding a crucifix and you've gobbled up some dots, but there are plenty of both, so you should be okay in that respect. All in all, this may well be the best game on the disc. It's either this or Burger Time, and I highly recommend it. Underworld, or Devil World to give it its original title, is a fantastic maze game that you really should try out. Here on the N-Joypad, the cheapish controller isn't a problem for playing this, and it's a lot of fun. And that's all there is on this first disc. It's the smallest selection of titles, and many of them simply don't have anything to do with the purported theme of intelligence. There are some great fun games on here though, as well as some not so great ones, so it really is a mixed bag. On the whole, the guys at ABL really do know how to pirate some good games. This first disc was quite interesting, so how will the other two discs hold up? Well, there's only one way to find out. First on the new disc is UFO Race, a very dark, very unpleasant looking space-themed version of Nintendo's F1 race. This sucks. This sucks a lot. You press A to accelerate and B to brake, while the D-pad moves you left and right across the course. The D-pad also switches gears by using the up and down buttons, so expect to accidentally do that a fair amount while you're playing, unless your fingers are very tiny. It's one of the most basic styles of racing game that you can imagine, and it won't hold your attention. Also, the game begins on what would really just be Stage 2 in the original game, because apparently changing the name and switching up which race you start on is enough effort to not get caught stealing. It really feels like this was a quick and dirty ROM hack rather than a proper attempt to make a different version of a fun game. And the fact that score is spelled scrow isn't doing anything to change that impression. If you're into very early racing games, give this one a try. If you're not, skip it. So for our next game, we go from a crappy racer to another racer. Now, I'll be the first to admit that racing games have a hard time differentiating themselves from one another because of the limitations of actually depicting a real-world motorsport, but there are ways to change up how to represent the game on the screen, how you handle the controls, that kind of thing. Can this game manage that? Well, let's take a look and find out. Yes, it can. Obstacle Race, originally known as Zippy Race from Shoot 'em Up Masters IREM, is a far more interesting game than UFO Race ever managed to be. You drive a motorbike down branching roads, attempting to pass by obstacles on your journey from the back of the race to the front, hence Obstacle Race, I suppose. There are many cars that you have to pass along the way, and some of them will outright attempt to run you off the road, so you've got to keep your wits about you. Despite its basic look and rudimentary controls, which are basically the same as the previous game, this is a very fun game, and I found myself enjoying it quite a bit. The N-Joypad's controller works just fine here, which is a nice bonus as well. So what's next? My goodness! It's not a racing game! But it is another game that hasn't had its title changed, although given the subject matter it would be difficult to come up with another name for it that actually made sense. If you played Nintendo's Baseball, you know what to expect here from Baseball. It's a decent enough baseball game, and it's certainly as good, if not better, than World Series Baseball on the CPC, which was my go-to game if I wanted to play baseball on my computer. Wow, how many times did I just say baseball? The controls are decent enough, the graphics aren't that great, but they do get the job done, and while there's hardly any sound, it doesn't actually get in the way. All in all, this is not a bad version of baseball on a console. And if you're into retro sports games, this might be one to take a look at. Now we come to Future Copter, which is a clone of Battle City by Namco. You play as a helicopter who is tasked with kicking the arses of all of the other helicopters on the screen. There are 50 screens built into the game, and a construction kit built in so that you can make more if you fancy it. In the original game, you play as a tank, but in this ROM hack, they've changed that to a helicopter. It goes a long way to explaining why you can pass underneath girders in your flying machine, but you can't cross over water. If you'd have thought that pirates of all people would have been aware of what can and can't traverse water, but maybe that's giving these guys too much credit, I don't know. To be honest though, the shape of the sprite is not important. What's important is the quality of the game, and to give it its due, this is a decent game that's definitely worth taking a look at. The controls are good, despite the cheapness of the N-Joypad controllers, and it's a lot of fun to play a quick round or two. I doubt it has any long-term appeal, and I certainly couldn't see myself sitting down to play all 50 stages in one go, but I do enjoy this one, and I think it's a game that I could see myself coming back to for a quick blast here and there in the future. Next, we have Diamond, which is a copy of Nice Code's Diamond. It's another one of those games where even the title wasn't changed to hide where this came from. This is an Arkanoid clone with a difference. Instead of simply destroying all the blocks on the screen, you have to destroy enough blocks to make it to the diamond that will be stuck somewhere amongst the blocks. This can be easier said than done, of course. I've never been the biggest fan of Arkanoid or Breakout style games on a digital controller because these games really need the finesse of an analog input. But even with this drawback, I have to admit that this is a pretty good game. I had a lot of fun with it. The power-ups are pretty limited though. You have one that expands the paddle, one that shrinks it, and one that makes the ball stick to it. If there are more, I didn't find them, but I'll give it to the original designers that even these are enough to make the game interesting. It's one you'll enjoy coming back to if you like Arkanoid-style games. The N-Joypad controller doesn't work too badly, given the limitations of a digital controller, so overall I'm actually quite happy with what I have here. The music is catchy too, which is a definite bonus. Now, no console is complete without a tennis game. It's one of those situations that we always just expect in life, you know? You've got some graphics on a screen and you've got a controller to move those graphics around, so naturally you're going to try to play a game of tennis. Pong did it, Nintendo did it, Sega did it, everyone does it. And when it comes to the N-Joypad, the fact that Nintendo did it seals the deal. As you'll already be expecting by now, Tennis on the N-Joypad is a complete rip-off of Tennis by Nintendo. All the replaced graphics are terribly drawn because, hey, why exert any effort, right? And they absolutely make no sense. Why are caterpillars watching and umpiring a game of tennis? Why are all the insects the same size as all the humans? Are we playing tennis or are we watching some guy's LSD trip gone wrong? What is going on in this game? The sound effects aren't exactly great either, but at its core, this is still Nintendo's original tennis from the Famicom and the NES, and that means that it's still a very playable game of tennis. The controls do take a little getting used to, but there is a decent variety of moves, and there's certainly enough to this rendition of tennis to keep you occupied if you decide to give it a go. I personally still prefer Pete Sampras Tennis on the Mega Drive, or even the Wii Sports version of tennis, but this is still a decent enough 8-bit rendition of the game, so I'll give it a pass. Planetary Pool, which is a hack of Pony Canyon's Lunar Pool, has an atrocious soundtrack, but decent graphics, and a computer player that will absolutely kick your ass if you let it get onto the table. Don't let it get on the table. Despite all that, it's a decent game of pool and I enjoyed it quite a bit. As with all of the older pool games, it's presented in a top-down view with angular controls. So you choose which direction to aim the ball in, but that's about it. You won't be doing trick shots here, just playing a straight game of pool. And to add a little bit of extra skill to the game over mastering basic trigonometry, the power meter is constantly going up and down, so you have to time when you choose to make your shot with quite a bit of precision. It can take a few tries to really get to grips with the controls because of the power meter thing, and also because the crosshair for your aiming appears to be rendered underneath the balls, which means it sometimes disappears. But aside from these minor issues, there is a lot of retro fun to this pool game. How's that? Hang on, that's cricket, isn't it? Next up we have Climbing Club, which you'll know better as Nintendo's Ice Climber. The controls are a bit clunky on this one, and to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of Ice Climber in the first place, so maybe this just isn't the game for me. However, the graphics in this version are, well, let's just say ridiculous. What is that main character sprite supposed to be? Is it an alien or a badly drawn blue monkey? I just can't tell. And the sound is also terrible. To be honest, this one just doesn't click with me. I really just don't like it. Next game. Bird Brain is a ROM hack of Toshiba EMI's Bird Week, and it's very basic. You play as a small bird who has to collect butterflies to feed its 2 chicks. If you get hit by another bird, you lose a life. If you feed the chicks enough, they turn into bigger birds and fly away. When all the chicks have flown away, you move on to the next level. That's all there is to it. The controls take a few tries to get used to because you'll need to be positioned in exactly the right spot and facing in exactly the right direction in order to feed the chicks. Once you've got that worked out though, the game loses most of its challenge. Collecting the butterflies can be frustrating at times because the movement patterns and directions of the butterflies are random, and so are the patterns of the enemy birds. But there's so little going on here that your biggest challenge is not actually having your mind wander while you play. It's not a bad game, but it's far from being a great game. Give it a try. If you fancy it, it might be enjoyable enough for you for a few minutes of playtime. Wow, this next game manages to violate 2 copyrights at once. It's Need for Speed, but it's not the Need for Speed that you're thinking of. Instead, this is a ROM hack of Spy Hunter, and it plays pretty well. which, to be honest with you, you'd expect since it's Spy Hunter on a Nintendo, and Spy Hunter on Nintendo was pretty good. I never really got Spy Hunter as a concept back when the 8-bits ruled the roost, and if I'm honest, I still don't. But despite that, this seems like a very decent rendition of the game, and it plays just fine on the N-Joypad's clunky controller. It's a good game, it's just one of those ones where I just don't quite get it, but I can see that it's a good game, I can enjoy it well enough as it is. It's not really for me. If you're into Spy Hunter, this version will definitely be a fun game to play, but let's face it, if you're into Spy Hunter, you probably already have a copy of it anyway. Okay, can someone please explain this one to me because I just don't get it? This is Bumpity Bop, also known as Bump and Jump by Data East. You seem to be driving along a road, trying to catch up with a truck of some sort, and everyone else is trying to run you off the road before you get there. If the other cars touch you, you'll pinwheel around the screen like you're a balloon with a hole in it. You have to stay on the road, which is red for some reason, and I just don't understand why, and you have to not touch any of the other areas of the screen. The road will change width at random, and also change direction. You can bump the other cars off the road in the same way that they'll do that to you, but it's risky because, as I said, they can and will bump you right back. This is a weird game, but it's decent fun at the same time. I don't really get what I'm supposed to be doing on it in terms of strategy and so forth, but I do enjoy playing it. No, you're not seeing things. This really is a game that we've already looked at earlier on this disc, and yes, it really is here again, on the same disc, just under a different name. What, you thought all of these games were going to be unique? Come on guys, you should know better than that. This is a pirate console. Of course they're not going to put effort in. This is In-N-Out Racer, which sounds both like a sexual euphemism and the fast-paced drive-through at a burger joint. It's another ROM hack of Zippy Race by IREM, which we already saw earlier when it was under the name of Obstacle Race. Is this version any different? Well, the graphics are different. It also seems to be a little bit easier to progress, at least at first. Maybe this version of the game starts you on a lower level than the other one did, or maybe it's just that this ROM hack has made the obstacles a little bit more spaced out. Either way, it's a reasonable game if you're into the top-down racing style. The graphics suck though. I get that you're supposed to be racing through a woodland area, but let's face it, a green screen filled with 8-bit green just looks awful. Not really one for vomit-inducing graphics. Anyway, next up we have a copy of a copy, but that still doesn't make the piracy any better. This is Brush Roller from Huang Xinwei, and I'm probably mispronouncing that. It appears here on the N-Joypad as Monster Dash. It's a Pac-Man clone, where instead of eating dots, you have to cover the maze in a coat of paint. It's a really nice game, which is, unfortunately, let down by the clunky controls. There were several points during play where my character just wouldn't turn a corner, leading to my death, which is never what you want in a game. And this is one of those situations where the N-Joypad's controller isn't the problem. The N-Joypad has a bit of a clunky controller, which does actually get a little bit easier on the fingers once you've walked it in a bit, but when I'm pressing a button, it does actually respond to that button press. This game doesn't though, so it has to be something to do with the way it's coded. The soundtrack is also terrible as well. Even early Spectrum games would balk at this mess. When the controls are working and you've muted the sound, there is a lot to like here. The mazes aren't all that brilliant, but there are some legitimate inventive features in there. The mazes aren't all that brilliant, but there are some imaginative features in here, such as being able to use a large brush to destroy enemies for a small amount of time. It's also cool that the enemies will team up together and try to fence you in, which makes for a more tactical game than you might have already been expecting. So all in all, I actually do rather like this one, and even though the controls can be a right pain in the backside, I've still enjoyed playing it quite a bit. Next up we have Street Frenzy, which you may know better as City Connection from Jaleco, and I'm going to be straight with you, straight off. I have no idea what I'm supposed to be looking at when it comes to this game. At best guess, I'm playing as a biker who is driving along one of 3 floating platforms, or maybe driving on the grass. You don't want to drive on the grass though, because if you're caught down there by enemies, there's no way out. Monsters are in your way, and while you have the ability to shoot fireballs, because hey, why wouldn't someone who's sitting on top of the gas tank of their vehicle want to shoot fireballs? The monsters, they don't seem to be affected by them all that much. You can jump over the monsters, but you need to be really precise about it, because if you're not, you're screwed. You can pick up oil barrels, and the game is tracking how far you've driven, but aside from that, I just don't get it. The game is weird, and the soundtrack, well, it's just terrible. I can't recommend it. Okay, what else have we got? Excitebike by Nintendo is one of those games that pretty much everyone has at least heard of, if not already played. Well, if you haven't already played it, you can have it on the N-Joypad. Plug in Disc 2 and play Extreme Racer, because that's the ROM hack of Excitebike. Instead of being a motorbike champion though, you're now driving a drag race car from the early days of motorsports. You do the same jumps, and it looks like you're about the same size as the motorbike was in the original game, which makes me wonder just how your car is surviving some of these obstacles. The game is decent, and I do enjoy playing it, even if it did stretch credulity a bit with its change from bike to car. The controls work really well in this one, despite the clunkiness of the N-Joypad controller, and all in all, it's not a bad game. Next up we have Championship Golf, which is just regular old black box NES Golf from Nintendo, only with a really badly drawn golfer in place of Mario. It's a decent enough game, and the controls work just fine. As with many of these standard traditional sports games, there's really not a lot that can be said about Championship Golf. If you enjoy playing NES Golf, you'll enjoy playing Championship Golf because it's the same game. If you don't enjoy NES Golf, don't bother with this one, because it's the same game. Okay, now it's time for some bad boys from outer space to body slam the human race. Or at least, that's what I would be saying if this was still Bandai's muscle. But it's not. The game's the same, but they've screwed up all of the graphics. Ever wanted to see a teddy bear wrestle a tiger while a pig and a hedgehog look on, ready to get tagged into this epic showdown? Well, now you can with Championship Wrestling. This game took Bandai's muscle wrestling game and turned it into a surreal animal fighting cage match that would be illegal anywhere except in a video game. Your moveset might be rather limited. I want to say it is limited, but I universally suck at wrestling games, so I may simply be unable to do any of the special move, and quite frankly, I have no idea what's going on with that power-up thing. Is he pulling stuffing out of the other wrestler, or is that supposed to be fire? I just don't know. The graphics are quite bad with this one. I also have no idea how to pin anyone in this game, or even know if you can pin anyone. But I did enjoy making my teddy bear launch himself off the ropes and body slam the tiger. That was fun. I don't normally like wrestling games because, let's face it, most of them are terrible, but this one's a reasonable one though. Well, my goodness! Jungle Trail is the cutest version of Lode Runner that I have ever seen. It's nicely done, the controls work just fine, and even the sound is nice with this one. I like it a lot. It's damn hard, but I like it a lot. There's very little else to say about this one, to be honest. Give it a try. If that last review was too short for you, don't worry. Having just one Lode Runner game on the disc was apparently just not enough for the pirates, so here's Arctic Hunt, also known as Championship Lode Runner, from Hudson Soft. Again, this is a really good game with excellent controls, and the Arctic theme the pirates have slapped onto this game actually fits it quite well. Championship Lode Runner, as the title may suggest, is a lot more difficult than the original one, with plenty of locations where you can get totally stuck. If that happens to you, your only option is to reset the game and try again. I found it rather challenging, but a lot of fun to play nevertheless. I can't say which I prefer, this one or the original Lode Runner. I think it's always going to come down to personal preference in the end. What I can say, however, is that they're both really good fun. The music isn't too bad, they look pretty good, and the controls work rather well. Both of them are actually definitely worth checking out. In a strange turn of events, American football here actually has a more relevant, normal-sounding title than the original game. This is a pirate clone of 10 Yard Fight, a NES game from IREM, and I'm sorry to say it's the weakest on the disc by far. It's slow as all hell, and it just doesn't bear playing for more than a few minutes. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of American football ever. I have played a lot of American football games over the years, though. You might remember the multi-part review that I did of the Madden series, for example. But I can honestly say this isn't the worst American football game that I've ever played on a console. It's not even the worst version of the sport ever. Of course it's not, because that's the Amsoft version of American football for the Amstrad CPC 464. But if we limit ourselves just to consoles rather than computers, it is ranking near the worst one. I can't recommend playing this at all. There are better American football games on the NES that could have been swiped mercilessly to create this game. 10-Yard Fight isn't a good game. They should have gone for something like Tecmo Bowl or NFL Football. Those were good. Basically anything that isn't this clunky mess with its jerky movement and sluggish controls would have been much better. So this disc's contents, on the whole, stuck pretty much to what it says on the disc. Although when it says sports and adventure, it's going to be hard not to stick to that, because let's face it, if it's not a sports game, it's going to be adventure or puzzle, and they've already done puzzles, so there you are. I am a little bit concerned that at this point they've already doubled up on a game, so it does feel a little bit like they're starting to lose their grip, if you might say. So when it comes down to not being able to pirate 20 different games, I am starting to worry about what's going to be on disc 3. Shall we have a look at it? So here we are. The third and final disc in the set. This is the Action Games series, and it's the disc that you'll leave in the console the most. If you're not a fan of puzzle games, this is the one you're going to be playing with, because what can I say? Action games, it's what retro gaming is mostly about, isn't it? You plug it in, you sit down for a quick game, it's going to be probably an action game. So, shall we take a look and find out what is on this 30 game disc? The first of the 30 games on this disc is called Archery, which initially made me wonder why it was on here instead of on the sports disc. When I saw what the game actually was, I quickly understood why it wasn't on there. This isn't an archery game. It's Pooyan by Hudson Soft, a game that I actually adore. The game is simple to control, but it quickly becomes a frenetic, button-mashing bloodbath of arrows, slashed umbrellas, and utter chaos. I can't recommend this game highly enough. It is fantastic. Then we have Zero Gravity, which, funnily enough, requires gravity as an important game mechanic, because hey, who requires consistency? As you can see, this is quite clearly a reskin of Balloon Fight by Nintendo. You may also know this kind of bouncy battling game as a Joust clone, which is where I know these mechanics from, so again, this is pretty much a copy of a copy. Whichever version of this game you're playing though, it is a lot of fun, and I really do enjoy this one. The graphics are decent enough, and the gameplay is certainly spot on, as you would expect from a blatant ROM hack of a Nintendo game. The controls work well too. I definitely recommend this one. Guys, why is this baby walking on a tightrope? Why are there Pokemon trying to kill it? Is that baby Bonk from Bonk's Adventure? What is going on here? These questions and more will be ones that you ask yourself if you try Super Elf on the N-Joypad, also known as Circus Charlie on the Famiclone. While the game looks good and controls well, I have to admit I find the concept of walking along a line and occasionally jumping over enemies with nothing else going on a bit dull. There are some other levels that change the gameplay a bit, such as the one where you are surfing underwater on a clamshell and occasionally you have to bounce off sponges, but the core concept of the game just doesn't work for me. It's not a bad game, it's just not a great game. Give it a try if you must, but I'm not going to recommend it. Have you ever wanted to see Kirby kick the crap out of a load of tiny creatures while spelling out some words? Well, now you can in Gold Digger, a sprite-swapped rip-off of Sunsoft's classic game Super Arabian. This one controls really well, and it has acceptable music too. It looks pretty good and it plays fantastically. I rather enjoy it, and if you're into slightly puzzle-based platformers, because you have to collect all of those letters in the right order, guys, well, you'll have a lot of fun with this one. Okay, here's one we've actually seen before. A year or so ago, I covered Binary Land in its own episode, and that was the first time that I introduced the N-Joypad console onto GameHammer. If you want to see a full, in-depth review of this game, you can take a look at that episode. For now, though, And in the spirit of completeness, I'll just say that Marsman, which is what the N-Joypad pirate version of Binary Land is called, plays really well. It's just like the NES port of the original game, as you would expect, but here, the penguins have been replaced by a gay couple, and you start the game on the first bonus level. The game is fluid, and everything works just fine. The auto graphics are decent enough, and the graphical changes don't actually get in the way of the gameplay, or of you understanding what's going on. All in all, I can't fault it. It really is a lot of good fun, just like the real version on the NES. Ah, we finally get to see a vertically scrolling shooter! Sometimes I think it's amazing that so few of what was a huge genre in the arcades managed to make a proper impact on home consoles back in the day. Here's Mars, also known as Hudson Soft's classic Star Force. It's a fun, smooth and nicely controlled shoot 'em up that I absolutely adore. It's just a shame that every time you start the game, or die and start a game with a new life, you will be subjected to a tune that gets very, very old very, very quickly. Aside from that, it's fantastic. Ever wanted to play a game where some trolls stand under trees and occasionally punch each other in the face until one of them feels like he's had a bit too much of that, so he rolls away and stands under another tree, and then they all start it again? Of course you have, and that's why you bought Urban Champion back in the day, and then ABL stole it and turned it into this mess here. This is Spar. The game plays out pretty much how I just explained it. There are trees, there are trolls standing by those trees, and the trolls are beating each other up. Apparently some people live in the trees because there are windows in them, and occasionally someone will throw stuff down at the trolls like they're tossing water over some yowling feral cats to try and make them go away and let them get back to sleep. The game has 3 controls: move left, move right, and punch your opponent in the face. If you move away from the opponent at the right time while pressing the punch button, you will dodge their attack. You now know how to play this game, and I recommend you don't. It is exceptionally dull. Oh my goodness, what have they done to Pac-Man? This is a terrible, terrible version of the game. The hacked graphics are atrocious and don't fit with the spirit of the game whatsoever. The sound is pretty damn poor, and altering the game so that instead of collecting dots, you're a bug laying eggs? It just makes the game look really off-putting. The controls are awful in this version, thanks mostly to the poor quality of the N-Joypad's controller. Its D-pad just isn't up to the job, I'm sorry to say that, but it means that it's hard to control your bug as it moves around the maze. You can still play a game of Pac-Man on this, despite the numerous flaws, but I really don't recommend it. Pac-Man is available on pretty much every console and computer and mobile phone under the sun, so go and play one of those versions instead. Oh, and they didn't even take Pac-Man out of the cutscenes. This is a really botched job. Now, believe it or not, the next game I'm going to show you is from the guy who did SimCity. I mean, it's not his original game, it's been ripped off, but it's from the guy who did SimCity. And SimCity was important to me. It was a very integral part of my early days of PC gaming. So let's have a look at what this guy managed to do for home consoles. This is Helicopter Harry, a pirate version of Will Wright's Raid on Bungling Bay. It's a strategic war game that he developed shortly before putting together SimCity. In fact, Will Wright put a map editor together for Raid on Bungling Bay to form the levels for the game, and apparently he found that he actually preferred messing around with the map editor to actually playing the game he'd made it for. So he kept expanding and refining that editor, and eventually it turned into the classic city building simulation that we all know and love. So how does Raid play on the N-Joypad? Well, it's okay. The tile scrolling on the edges of the screen makes the game a bit of a flickering mess, and it'll probably cause some problems if you have epilepsy, so it's not exactly brilliant, but aside from that, yeah. Now, the helicopter can be difficult to steer, especially at high speeds, and I have no idea what I'm supposed to be bombing, because if this console actually came with instructions, I don't have them. Also, the music, yeah, it's atrocious. Aside from all that, though, I actually found myself enjoying the game. There are many flaws to it, but the freedom to just fly around and fire rockets at things was a lot of fun. I recommend giving this a try, for curiosity's sake if nothing else. Okay, let's move on. Now, this next game I'm going to show you is a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up, which is actually right up my street. but it does have a few gravity-based thrust mechanics to it, like Solar Jetman or Thrust. So I'm probably going to have a bit of trouble with it because gravity-based momentum stuff, it's not really my wheelhouse. But let's give it a try. Jaleco's Exerion, which appears here under its pirate name of Flyby, because why not have a really, really unique name, you know? Actually plays rather well. I'm surprised because gravity thruster games like this require precision control, and that's not something that you can usually rely on from the N-Joypad controller, but it's here, and actually I did alright with it. It will take you a few minutes to properly get used to the controls, mostly because of the controller, and you will never get used to whatever that screeching noise is that passes for a title tune. But once you get into the game itself and get a hang of what you're doing, this is one of those gems that you'll keep coming back to for another try. Oh my goodness, this has been a long process so far, but don't worry, we are getting there. We're 10 down on disc 3 now, so there's only 20 games left. Let's see what's up next. This is Snack Attack, a collect-em-up action game where you have to avoid a guy who looks far too much like your guy for his own good. It's ridiculously easy to get confused at the start of a level about which of these characters you are, which is never an example of good game design. The game is a hack of Nuts and Milk by Hudson Soft, which is a game that I have to admit I've never heard of, and which sounds a bit strange. To be honest with you, I don't think I was missing out. Once you've worked out who you're playing as, your mission is to collect the items on the screen without falling too far or dropping into the water. Don't worry if this takes you a few tries to get the hang of, because the computer is just as confused about what's going on as you are, so you won't be at a disadvantage. When you've collected your items, a third character will appear inside the forest-covered hut that is somewhere on the screen, and they'll shout for help. Reach them to progress to the next level. Your controls are the D-pad for movement and every other button for jumping. The controls are decent enough and the music is bearable, so the game is definitely playable. It's just that it just didn't really gel with me, you know? But maybe it will for you. Everyone's preferences are different after all, so, yeah, give this one a try, and it might be something that you'll enjoy. Chack and Pop from Taito, which is presented here as Bomb Drop, and to be honest, I don't know which has the worst name, is a weird puzzle game where you try to burst eggs, destroy monsters, and rescue a balloon that has the power to destroy the walls that your bombs can't. Yeah, you heard that right. A balloon that can destroy walls that a bomb can't. Only in video games would that make sense. The challenge comes from getting the bombs to land in just the right place. The eggs, monsters, or the cage that the balloon is inside must be within the bomb's blast radius, so that makes sense. That should all sound simple enough, yeah? But it turns out it's really not. The bombs will bounce around the level before settling and exploding, so there's a lot of trial and error involved here. You'll either be fine with trying to pinpoint the pixel that you need to stand on to get just the right shot, or you'll get frustrated and turn the game off. It's an either-or situation, there's no in-between. Personally, I enjoyed it, especially for a few minutes of gameplay here and there. I'll admit it is a bit of an oddity of a game, but it's definitely worth giving a try. Next up we have Dig Dug from Namco, only here it's called Down Deep because names don't have to make sense in Pirate Land. Still, it's not like Dig Dug was a good name in the first place, so perhaps we can give them a pass on this one. You play as a cross between the Red Angry Bird and Sonic the Hedgehog, because thinking up new characters is really hard, guys. Anyway, Angry Sonic here is tasked with deflating all the other living beings on the planet, and he's decided to do this one screen at a time. That way, the terror of the populace can be milked for all it's worth. Sorry, got a bit carried away there. But yeah, it's not a hard game. Dig Dug never was, after all. It's very playable, it plays nicely here despite the cheapness of the controller, so if you fancy giving this game a try, you'll find a lot here to like. Next up we have a hack of Sky Destroyer by Taito. It's called Propeller here and it's a lot of fun. The game is very much in the style of Space Harrier, with that rapidly scrolling ground immediately bringing Sega's classic to mind. It plays much the same as Space Harrier, only with fewer things to dodge, so I am actually really enjoying playing this one. Managing to hit anything can be quite tricky though, thanks to the fact that you have to aim slightly above where your propeller is, but the animation on the propeller makes it look an awful lot like it's your reticule for aiming. So the game is kind of leading you to focus on the wrong thing, which is a bit annoying. But if you try to get your mind off that, you'll find a really fun game here. My only real complaint about this one is the fact that you aren't playing on levels or stages, you're playing on wars. That might sound pedantic, but basically the game is suggesting that every time you complete a stage, you've ended an entire war by yourself. It's an interesting way of boosting the player's ego, but I'm not sure it's very realistic in the great scheme of things. If you're familiar with retro classics, the next game needs no introduction. Neighborhood Smash is one of those games where there are two things wrong with the title. There is no neighborhood, and nothing gets smashed. Instead, this is a ROM hack of karateka, or karateka, or however you want to pronounce it. And I'm kind of using ROM hack in the loosest sense of the word here. It's just karateka, and if there are any changes to that game in here, I can't find them. The game controls really nicely, as you would expect, and it's a lot of fun once you've got the hang of it. Modern gamers will find this one a little slow and not quite as responsive as the fighting games that they're used to, but if you're prepared to take it as it comes, you'll have a lot of fun. It is a classic for a reason, and I really do quite like it. Enemy Assault, or Kojiku Yusai Macross to give it its original name, is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up where the initial goal is to survive wave after wave of enemies who are assaulting your spaceship while you fly from outer space to some kind of base somewhere. When you get there, the secondary goal is to survive an intense assault on your sensors from the garish background that has no business being that busy because it makes spotting the enemies and their attacks far too difficult. This is a Namco game, so you know it's going to play well. Those guys really did know what they were doing on the Famicom and the NES. It's a lot of fun, I really have to admit that. I really do enjoy playing it, despite the fact that it looks like a magic eye puzzle and the second half of each level is basically unwatchable. Clue Clue Land from Nintendo arrives on the N-Joypad as Fish Fight, and to be honest with you, I just don't get it. You seem to be a fish that's trying to be the only living creature in a pond, which means you have to kill everything else that moves. You do this by moving constantly, only changing direction by swinging around water lilies like you're some kid at a play park, and attacking the other denizens of the pond using a wave attack. If other fish are unlucky enough to be caught up in your psychopathic wave of destruction, then they will turn into a cookie. Don't believe me? Take a closer look. See? It's a cookie. You then have to push this cookie to the edge of the pond before the enemy fish wakes up again, at which point it will be destroyed. Oh, and watch out for the portal to another dimension that's in the middle of the pond, because that's where the enemy fish come out of. So, are they actually invaders and you're defending your pond from them? Because if so, that changes things. They can swim over the portal without a problem, but if you touch it, you get sucked inside and die. It's a weird game, but it's fun enough in short bursts, and the controls work reasonably well on the N-Joypad controller, so there is that at least. Okay, it's time to get down to some monkey business, N-Joypad style. What's up? What's up? I don't know. What's up with this game? What's up with that title? What's up with this being a complete knockoff of Nintendo's famous Donkey Kong? What's up with it starting you on a later level so that you don't get to see the iconic levels that everyone remembers? What's up with these awful graphics? You play as a ridiculous pink ball with feet because designing new characters is clearly beyond the abilities of people who made these cheap ROM hacks. Donkey Kong has been turned into a green goblinoid monster, and the barrels are now Earth, because nothing needs to make sense in the wacky world of the N-Joypad. Basically, it's Donkey Kong, and it plays as well as you would expect that NES Donkey Kong would play. You'll enjoy it despite the atrocious graphics and the fact that the two levels everyone remembers the most are locked out so you can't play them. But here's the thing. They didn't just rip off this original Donkey Kong. I mean, why would they? Why would they stop there when they could have all of the Donkey Kongs all mangled up and served up here in horrible form for your graphic delights? I mean, what else could we have here? Let's see what else is in Pirate's store for the rest of the series, me hearties. Arr, Jim lad, I can do a very good pirate accent, so I can. Arr. I can't really, can I? Let's just get on with it. What the hell did they do to Donkey Kong Jr.? Why is the main character now some kind of burglar, yet he has all of the animations of a gorilla? Why is there a hat floating at the top of the screen, and why can't I pick that hat up? Who puts a hat in a game when you can't wear the hat? That is just madness. What were they thinking with this utter mess? But here's the thing. The game is still just as fun as ever, despite its major graphical flaws. The sound is acceptable if a bit repetitive, and I'm sure you could get past the stupid visuals that they've coated this game in. And then the sound would probably eventually get annoying while you played, but you could always turn it down. And the game is still Donkey Kong Jr. at heart, even if they're now calling it Rescue instead of what it actually is. And now it's themed around a burglar stealing bags of money so that he can reach a monkey, and somehow we are expected to think this all makes sense. Who am I rescuing? Am I rescuing the monkey? If so, why am I paying the monkey? Does the monkey need all of this money? Why? What does he need the money for? Come on. Is he trying to buy his way into a game that looks nicer? If so, good luck to him. Anyway, the game is worth playing unless you have the original NES version, in which case I recommend that you play that instead because it will make an awful lot more sense. And please, if you know why it's called Rescue, please do tell me. Now, if you thought 2 Donkey Kong games was enough, you were probably right. Nevertheless, here is Donkey Kong 3, another Nintendo game that has been mercilessly trashed in the name of padding out this console's library. Here they've called it Frogland, and even after the pirates have messed with it, it still has as much in common with Donkey Kong as the original version of this game did. I don't know what Nintendo were thinking when they put the original game together, but when I look at Donkey Kong, the first thing that comes to mind for me is definitely not a dude firing globs of goodness knows what at a gorilla that's hanging between 2 beehives. Graphically, this is the best of the Donkey Kong hacks on the console. It is a brilliant looking game with some real charm and character to it. The changes that have been made make little sense overall, but the look to the thing is wonderful. The soundtrack is decent enough as well, and it's really funny to hear the clump 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 of Donkey Kong smashing the ground when the spider lands if you lose a level. I don't know why, but that really does just make me chuckle. Maybe the spider's wearing clogs or something like that, and that makes that amount of noise, or maybe I'm just overthinking this. Either way, it is a fun game, and you should definitely give it a try. Now, what Famiclone system would be complete without a hacked Mario game? None, that's what. And yes, that is a proper sentence, shut up. This is Jumper and Journey, which you'll know better as Nintendo's famous Mario Bros. Game. No, not the Super Mario Bros., the original Mario Bros. The one where Mario is actually at least located in an area that you might expect to find a plumber. He's not doing standard plumber things, but at least he's actually gone to work for a change, so there is that. Well, in the original game, he's gone to work anyway. In this version, the guy in the bought-at-the-last-minute Mario cosplay costume is running around a forest of some description, beating worms unconscious and then jumping on them like a psycho. The game controls well, even if it doesn't look that good, and the core Mario Bros. Game is still in there, so it's actually not a bad game to play. I enjoyed it, even if I didn't actually enjoy looking at it. Next up, we have Saucer Wars. Now, this is a game where you play as a flying saucer that's flying through a field of meringues in order to reach an army base. Don't believe me? Take a look. See, it's just as strange as I told you it would be. Along the way to the army base, you can either shoot a load of soldiers or capture them and transport them in your flying saucer using a transporter beam. Meanwhile, helicopters and enemy flying saucers will try to shoot you down. It sounds like people are teaming up on you there, doesn't it? The soldiers will try to shoot you down too if you give them half a chance, and those guys are packing bazookas, so watch out. This is a fun little game which was originally released by Jaleco as Field Combat. The controls can be a little bit heavy, and there's a definite feeling of momentum being built up as you move, in a similar fashion to how Mario doesn't stop running the moment that you let go of the D-pad. This can take a little bit of getting used to, but it is worth it because the game is a decent amount of fun. One of the best side-scrolling arcade shoot-'em-ups of the early 80s was Defender, and here you have a Famicom port of its sequel, which is cunningly titled Defender 2, or at least it was when it was originally released, but now it's called Depths of Space, because the pirates simply can't leave a good thing alone. This is a fast-paced scrolling game that anyone who's familiar with Defender will be immediately at home with. It looks great, it plays great, and it sounds great. I cannot fault this game, it's excellent. The controls work really well with the N-Joypad's controller as well. There is nothing to complain about with this one. I love it. So we've just gone from an excellent side-scroller to a mediocre one. This game here is Convert Soldier, and it's also known as Formation Z by Jaleco. Let's take a look. It's a very basic run-and-gun game where you play as a soldier who has to take on wave after wave of enemy vessels, ranging from spaceships to tanks. You can move, aim, jump and shoot, and you'll need to do all 4 of those to stay alive. The graphics are basic, the sounds are basic, and the controls are, well, they're acceptable at a pinch. Although I'm not a fan of the fact that you can't aim backwards. This means that you get precisely 1 chance to hit each enemy, and if you don't do it, they might attack you, depending on how far through the level that you've got. It feels like there's very little going on the screen at any one time, and this is because the sprites are small enough to make the game feel empty. There are plenty of enemies to be getting on with, it's just that they are so small, it hardly makes a dent in the vast expanse of sky and ground around them. Making the enemies a little bit larger would not have hampered the game in any way. In fact, it would have made it feel like more was going on, and maybe it would have even got me invested in the action a bit. I have to say, I have little good to say about this one, to be honest with you. It's not a bad game, it's just lacking a lot of finesse. Swirl is HAL Laboratories' conversion of Millipede to the NES, with a military theme stuck onto it. It has all the brilliance of the original arcade game, and it plays incredibly well on the N-Joypad. The controls are smooth, the action is frenetic, and while the graphics can be a little bit blocky and ill-defined at times, what exactly are the moving things that look like pieces of blue-tinted road supposed to be? It doesn't actually detract from the fact that this is Millipede, one of the classic arcade games. Give it a try, it is brilliant. Okay, now I'm going to get honest with you here. I never really got Mappy. I played the original game, and when I came back to it not long ago, in fact, on the Namco arcade collections I've got, it just didn't feel like the game for me. And that's not to say that it's a bad game, because it isn't. It's just, it plays rather well, I just don't get it. It's just not the game for me. Breakout, despite the fact that it sounds like it's going to be a Breakout clone, is a ROM hack of Namco's Mappy for the NES, and once again, you play as a ball with legs because, well, those are easy for pirates to draw and animate. These graphics, well, they're reasonable if a little basic in places, and the sound is acceptable if a little bit distorted. The controls work well enough, and the original gameplay is all here, so as games go, this is a fun one and it plays pretty well. It's just not one of my favourites. Okay, we've had some pretty good titles on this disc so far, as well as a few clunkers, you're always going to get them, and some games I just didn't gel with. But now, we're down to the last 4, so we've got to ask ourselves, will this clone system go out with a bang, or will it simply wheeze over the finish line like a wet fart in a bag?
You're not good at this metaphor stuff, are you?
Shut it, monster. I've just reviewed 55 games in a row, and my creativity is taking a pounding.
Well, maybe some more games will help to revive you. Let's get back to the reviews.
Soaring Warrior is Joust, just with worse graphics. It's quite hard to give Joust worse graphics, given that the game is really old and it looked weird already, but somehow these guys have managed it. Thankfully, all the gameplay is still here, and it's still just as much fun to play now as it ever was. I never really got Joust when I was a kid. It always seemed a bit weird to me and hard to control, but as the years have gone on, it has actually finally clicked in, and now I rather like it. It's quirky and it's fun, and it's definitely one that you can play and enjoy for quite a while. I can see myself coming back to this version fairly regularly, because even though there are no knights or ostriches anymore, it's still a daft little game that's a lot of fun to pass the time with. Our next game, and the third from last on the entire console, is Let Loose, but you may know it better as Nintendo's amazing port of their arcade classic Popeye. One of Nintendo's earliest classics, Popeye is a brilliant arcade action game where you dodge Bluto, collect items, and save the love of your life, Olive Oil. It's an absolute gem of an arcade game, and if you ever see a Popeye machine out in the wild, I highly recommend you give it a try. Now, Let Loose is a pretty clumsy ROM hack of Popeye, So clumsy, in fact, that when you grab a power-up, the classic Popeye theme tune still plays, and the icon for how many lives you have left is Popeye's head. But yeah, they put the new sprites in for the characters to try to hide which game they'd ripped off, and then couldn't be bothered going through with actually changing anything else, so their laziness rendered the entire process pointless. But hey, that's piracy for you. In this version, you play as a humanoid pig, and you have to dodge a tramp while a penguin throws things at you. It's highly surreal, but the game is still there, and it still has all of that classic Popeye fun to it, so after the initial surprise factor, it's actually a lot of fun to play. I absolutely love playing the Popeye arcade game, and even though this is actually the first time that I had the chance to play the NES version, I think it's another classic, and I'm going to have to track down a copy of it for my collection when I finally add a NES to the set. Now, if you ever ask anyone who knows me what my favourite retro arcade classic game is, they'll tell you it's Bosconian, because Bosconian is awesome and it needs more love. Sadly, the second to last game is not a port of Bosconian. I wish it was, but it's not. Instead, it's a port of my second most favourite classic arcade game, Galaxian. It doesn't matter how badly you screw over the graphics, and they really did. Galaxian is still Galaxian, and Galaxian is fantastic. I do have some questions about the graphics though, and by questions I mean, what the hell are these things supposed to be? They look like plants that are being shot at by a Romulan Dideridex-class warbird from Star Trek The Next Generation. Come on, tell me you don't see it. Seriously though, this is Galaxian. Despite what they've done to it, it's still a playable game here in ROM hack form, and it's just as good as it ever was on the NES. The N-Joypad's controller may be a bit clunky and stiff at times, but this game is so simple and so straightforward that you genuinely won't mind. A classic is still a classic no matter how badly they butcher the graphics. It's a good game. Give it a try. So it comes down to this. We have covered from this disc the gamut of NES and Famicom titles. We have seen on our screen absolute classics and absolute dross. We've seen surreal graphics, vomit-inducing colour clashes, all kinds of lazy attempts at hiding the fact that these things are piracy. But what could possibly be left in store for us on this disc for the final game, the 59th game in the set, the final one? Well, let's take a look at Village Protector. I should have known. No cheap knockoff system is complete without its own port of Space Invaders. It's practically a law that all consoles have to be able to play this classic arcade game, and I'm happy to say that this version works rather well on the N-Joypad. It's almost as if this cheap console is made for simple shooting games like this. The hacked graphics don't look too bad, and actually the little wooden tiki huts look pretty damn good in place of the Space Invaders' traditional green barricades. Aside from this change, the game is pretty much the same as it always has been. Well, aside from the fact that all of the Space Invaders icons that we all know and love have been changed. Well, of course they have, I had to hide it. But the bonus UFO is still there for you to blast away at, which actually means that this ROM hack is a much better option than some of the cheap home computer ports that I've reviewed in the past. And all in all, it's a simple game, but it is a classic. And the NES port was brilliant to start with, so you know you're in for a good gaming session when you load this one up. It's fantastic. Well, that's it. 59 games, everyone. 59. All of them stolen from somewhere else. And most of them are actually not bad. They're pretty good games. I have to admit that when I first picked up the N-Joypad console, I expected to find a lot of dross on it, I have to admit. But it turns out these are actually pretty good games. And yeah, the controller is a little bit clunky, but you can still play the games. They're still fun to play, and I've actually enjoyed this. So, would I recommend this console to you? I have to say no, because it's a pirate system. Would I recommend the games that they've ripped off? Absolutely. I mean, look at the scores we've given some of these things. 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5. There are some great games on here. Take it as a good guide to some NES classic titles and go for that. That has been a massive, massive undertaking doing this. 59 games on the system. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you have too. But all good things have to come to an end, so I've got to say thank you very much for watching. That is all we've got time for. But do remember to click that like button if you enjoyed it and leave a comment because it does help the channel out a lot. But until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk Robinson. You've been watching GameHammer on the Knobmouse channel. Do remember to subscribe for future videos because there will be more in the future. And I'll see you then. If you liked today's video, please consider supporting me on Patreon. And an extra special thanks goes out to Chief89 and Tepic. Thank you.